I'll be presenting my graphic organizer on expectancy, value theory, and interest. So I attempted to organize the readings and discussions by first defining the overarching theories and concepts, so expectancy, value theory, and interest. Expectancy value theory posits that motivation is determined by two factors: expectancies for success, which are one's beliefs about how well they will do in an upcoming task, and subjective task values, which include attainment, intrinsic and utility value, and cost. And although there is the four-phase model of interest development as discussed in this week's readings, I just kept the definition kind of broad. So they defined it as a psychological state characterized by increased attention, effort, and effect experienced in a particular moment, as well as an enduring predisposition to re-engage with a particular object or topic over time. And so now moving on into this piece, I wanted to take a closer look at subjective task values and specifically cost, as well as how value and interest may be mutually inclusive to each other. So here I have kind of like my broad questions for each, for cost and also for value and interest. So we can start with interest. So along with the definition from above, interest also has to be content specific. At the same time, Horakovich explains that when one values something, they are more likely to develop greater interest, work harder, perform better, persist longer, etc. And so this made me wonder the extent to which value and interest are related, such that if one is interested in something, then maybe they come to value it, or maybe that's also not the case. However, throughout these readings, it seemed to me that interest and value were related to some extent. And more critically, Heidi et al. Argued that without support from others, any phase of interest development can become dormant. Therefore, again, it makes me wonder how a lack of support for one's interest can potentially lead them to not value a task. And then now moving on to cost. So after reading the Matthews piece, I started to look at expectancy value theory and particularly the cost aspect from a critical point of view. So although Flake et al. Focused on this forgotten component of the theory by attempting to create a cost scale, it seemed like through Matthews' interviews with Black and Latinx adolescents, we understand value and cost from a different perspective. Broadly, cost is defined as what an individual has to give up to do a task, and it includes different dimensions such as perceived cost, psychological cost, emotional cost, outside effort cost. And so I thought it was interesting how Flick et al. Created a new code during their qualitative study, not enough cost. That is, when students perceive a task as boring or requiring too much effort, too easy. And so it made me wonder, well, is there something like too much cost? And so when I reflected on the Matthews piece, I thought about certain things that students and the authors mentioned, such as systems and education that perpetuate inequalities that perceived in the perceived possibilities of mathematics for Black and Latinx students, and finding that it was that math may be important broadly, but it is not of personal importance for those who believe that it is only useful for social opportunities in life that they'll never have the chance to experience. And in a way, I found this to be a cost in and of itself, because even at this age, these adolescents are already perceiving that mathematics is not for them because of these systemic inequities. And therefore, it made me wonder if cost is not only what an individual has to give up, but what we as a society are giving up. That is the cost of systemic inequities on Black and Latinx students, and in particular, their interest and value for mathematics. So it makes me wonder, should we be focusing on refining and creating a cost scale, or should we also be doing more to support our children and work to alleviate these costs for them? And so we now move down to the last box. So throughout all of these articles, I think that the authors do a good job at providing future directions for research. However, I also think that there are gaps even within these implications. So first, I think about the question that Brophy posed. What is missing when we talk about value? They bring attention to appreciation. And I want to add what Matthews also found, that valuing and showing interest in math is more than identifying as a math person or obtaining a career in math, but it's about empowering Black and Latinx students, and that they can become self actualized through this. Um, and then the second one is, how is expectancy value theory conceptualized across cultures? And I think even though Wakefield et al. Attempt to showcase expectancy value theory from a cross-cultural perspective, I still found some of their findings to be limiting, considering that their major findings focused on Western, Eastern, individualistic, and collectivistic cultures. And I agree that instead of taking this edic approach, we need to utilize emic methods to understand how there's variation even within cultures. And lastly, how can we implement these theories and constructs into practice? Um, with expectancy value theory, I think that utility value interventions are common. However, I also think that Matthews brings up how teacher math applications can also be effective. And in class, we also talked about culturally relevant pedagogy, but more importantly, how we can help students develop their own agency in the classroom, and ultimately, providing this kind of support to students. And so that was the end of my graphic organizer. I hope I made some sense, but if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Thank you.